Hi, I'm Emily, and I have 3 kids. 3 years ago, I was still an inexperienced young woman. I had just started working at a veterinary clinic. I always dreamed of becoming a doctor or a vet. That day, I was late for work because I had been at the hospital in the morning. My boss told me I had to stay late and give an IV to a dog named Ron. At 8 p.m., all the clients had already left. It was just me and Ron in the building. In an hour, I was supposed to change his IV. I had some extra time, so I decided to have dinner. I pulled a sandwich out of my bag, made some coffee, and sat down in a chair. It was raining outside, and honestly, I didn't even feel like going home. The clinic wasn't very big, just 4 rooms and 1 break room. There was only 1 exit. I had asked my coworker Greg to lock the door before leaving, but apparently he forgot. That's where my nightmare began. I finished my coffee and went to the bathroom. I'd been feeling nauseous all day. That's when I heard it for the first time, a dog barking. Ron was barking for no reason. Many people believe dogs can sense danger. I washed up and went to give Ron his new IV. Everything went smoothly, but I noticed Ron kept listening closely and staring at the window. I went back to the break room and decided to call my boyfriend. I told him I was done with work and would be home soon. While I was packing my things, Ron started barking again. I looked out the window, but no one was there. I didn't understand what was bothering the dog, so I called the vet. He said the medicine might be making Ron react that way. I decided to stay a bit longer and keep an eye on him. The rain got heavier outside, and I could hear thunder rolling. Before that, I had felt cozy in the clinic, warm and safe. But with the appearance of thunder and lightning outside the window, I began to feel a little anxious. The wind was howling and making an awful noise. Ron started whining. He was scared too. I decided to bring Ron into the break room so we wouldn't be alone. Soon after, the nausea returned. I went to the bathroom and stayed there for a few minutes. That's when I heard the front door open. Ron started barking loudly. I was sure the door was locked. I rushed back to the break room and immediately locked the door. I had no idea who had entered the building. It was already 10 p.m., and I highly doubted it was a client. Another thunderclap roared outside. Then I heard footsteps. Someone had broken into the clinic and was near the reception area. That's when I realized I had to call the police. I whispered the address to the dispatcher. Another thunderclap. And then the power went out. Ron was lying next to me, still and quiet. It was pitch dark, and I used the light from my phone screen. I managed to find a knife on the dining table. The intruder was throwing things around, clearly looking for something. I called my husband. I was terrified. He could kill me. My husband immediately drove out to come help me. Meanwhile, the footsteps were getting closer. The intruder came right up to the door, the only thing standing between us. The door was wooden and old. Even I could have broken it down if I wanted to. I sat there in complete darkness, frozen in fear. I had no idea how this would end. What if he had a weapon? What if he wasn't alone? A loud thunderclap struck again, and suddenly, I stopped hearing the footsteps. He was right outside the door. He was trying to open it. My heart was pounding 200 beats per minute. I couldn't breathe. It felt like I was dreaming, like I was in a nightmare. The door wouldn't open, so he started yanking the handle violently. That's when Ron rushed to the door and began barking and growling like mad. Ron was a big dog, and honestly, he looked terrifying, but he was protecting me. He was ready to rip apart whoever was behind that door. The strangest part was that Ron had always been calm and kind. He had never barked at the doctors. Suddenly, the door handle stopped moving, and I heard something drop on the floor. Another thunderclap. I didn't hear anything else after that, and couldn't tell if anyone was still there. Ron stopped barking. A couple minutes later, I heard footsteps again. Someone inserted a key into the lock and opened the door. It was my husband and the vet. I sighed with relief. When I stepped out of the room, the clinic was completely trashed. Later, the police confirmed that some medication had been stolen. I don't know what the intruder needed the drugs for. The scariest part was that there was a knife lying right by the door. The intruder must have dropped it when Ron started barking. A few days later, I went for a medical checkup and found out I was pregnant. I'm forever grateful to Ron for saving me and my children. After that, I kept visiting him and gave him all his vaccinations for free. They never found the intruder. My name is Michael, and I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me 10 years ago. I was 32 years old, and in September my grandfather passed away. He was a very intelligent and responsible man. For several years he had lived far out of the city in his house. I was the only one who visited him every week. I loved my grandfather very much. He taught me everything I know and gave me more experience than my parents ever could. But unfortunately, we can't live forever, and he passed away. It makes me sad, but he taught me not to mourn those who have passed. He taught me to mourn for those who are still living. My grandfather lived a long life. He was an honorable man, a good father, and a good grandfather. He passed away like a real man, unafraid of death. He simply fell asleep. Of course, he left his house to me in his will. He knew I would take care of it, and if I decided to sell it, the money would go towards something important. Naturally, I wasn't planning to sell it, but I didn't feel like going there for the first year. There were too many memories there. I didn't go back to the house for an entire year, but I knew I had to do it. And then the moment came. I packed my things, brought some tools, and drove to my grandfather's house. It was located 20 miles outside the city, and there were only about 10 or 15 houses around. When I arrived, I immediately noticed that the old gate was open. I don't remember if I closed it a year ago. I didn't think much of it and walked inside. It was noon, but the house had no electricity, so I had to use a flashlight. I walked into the living room and decided to start by cleaning up. I packed my grandfather's things into boxes and began loading them into my minivan. Afterward, I started washing the floors and dusting everything. I wanted to fix up the house, repair everything that was broken, and visit on weekends. I spent the whole day cleaning until it got dark. The light from the windows no longer lit the house, and I decided to come back the next day. Before leaving, I was walking down the corridor in complete darkness and accidentally tripped. I leaned on the light switch and was very surprised. The house had electricity. Very strange, because I distinctly remember turning off the circuit breaker. I must have just forgotten. I left the house and drove away. The next day, I took some food with me and decided to stay overnight at the house. I went inside and began unpacking my things. Then I went to chop some wood to start a fire in the fireplace. I went to the shed to get the axe, but it wasn't there. The axe was lying next to the firewood, and I was surprised that it hadn't rusted. I chopped the wood and got back to work. There were still many things I needed to throw away and clean up. I worked until evening, and for 6 hours, I kept hearing a creaking sound from the attic. In an old house, there are always strange noises, and at night, they can even be scary. But I'd often stayed at my grandfather's place, so I was used to them, or so I thought since my grandfather was with me back then. But now, I had to spend the night alone. It got dark outside, and I lit the fireplace. It immediately made the house not only warm, but cozy as well. I decided to cook lamb stew and strong tea. My grandfather always drank tea, so I guess it passed down to me. I made my dinner, turned on the TV, and started eating. At that moment, I heard a noise from the attic. Something had fallen. But I was so tired that I didn't want to look for the ladder and climb up to the dusty attic. I finished eating and went to bed. I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, even though I was very tired. The bedroom seemed eerie without the lights. I kept hearing noises from the attic, the sound of metal, falling objects, and creaking boards. My imagination ran wild, and I felt like a child who believes in ghosts. It was hard to sleep. I kept thinking about who was making those sounds. I knew it could either be a wild animal or the wood had just become damp, but I felt incredibly uneasy in the silence and darkness. At 1 a.m., I finally fell asleep and woke up at 9 a.m. I was very cold and decided to warm up in the car. I was too lazy to start a fire in the fireplace. My third day began with me deciding to clean up the yard, but before that, I needed to check the attic. I found the ladder and climbed up to the attic. It was much cleaner than I expected, but I didn't find any wild animals. I went to mow the lawn, and at that moment, I saw an old man. He looked very unkempt. He probably drank a lot of alcohol. His clothes were torn, and he had cuts and bruises on his arms. He was walking past my house, and at some point, he looked me straight in the eyes. It felt like he recognized me. I continued mowing the grass, and an hour later, I saw the man again. He was walking toward me. The stranger came up to me and asked if I lived in this house. I said yes. He smelled strongly of cigarettes, alcohol, and urine. He told me to leave and not live there. He said that very bad things had happened in this house and that I shouldn't stay there. I realized the man wasn't sane and asked him to leave. Before he left, he cursed at me and said he had warned me. In the evening, I decided to stay overnight in the house again, but I didn't have any food. I locked the front door and drove to the nearest gas station. I bought a sandwich and a hot dog, then drove back home. When I returned, I noticed that the door to the house was open. I turned on the light and asked loudly, "Who's here?" There was no answer. I checked the whole house and found no one. Maybe I hadn't turned the key all the way when I left. That's the only explanation I thought of at the time. I ate and went to bed. This time, there were no noises from the attic, and I fell asleep peacefully. At night, I heard the front door open. I got up and turned on the light. "Who's here?" There was no answer. I grabbed the poker and went into the hallway. The door was open. I went outside but found no one. I immediately thought it was that strange man. After all, who else would come to visit in the middle of the night? I closed the door and went back to bed. On the fourth day, I was supposed to go to the office for work, but a day later, I returned to the house to finish my tasks. I needed to fix the shower, and I met that man again. I asked him not to come to my house at night, or I would call the police. But the man said he didn't understand what I was talking about. Before leaving, he gave me a stern look and said, "I warned you." That phrase made me feel uneasy. I don't know why, but I believed that it wasn't him who had come to see me. I couldn't leave for sure now because my parents were staying at my apartment. I had to stay one more night. In the evening, I lit the fireplace and went to bed. I heard the noise again and strange sounds from the attic, but this time, I was truly scared. Someone was walking in the attic. I realized it was night outside, and the closest place I could go was the gas station. No one would be able to help me in time. I grabbed the poker and slowly went toward the attic. There was a ladder I hadn't placed. I heard a cough behind the door. My grandfather used to cough like that. Goosebumps ran down my spine, and I froze in place. My imagination conjured up many terrifying and mystical things, and I just couldn't open the door. I took a step, and the floor beneath me creaked. At that moment, I heard the sound of a bottle breaking and footsteps approaching. I ran out of the house, got in the car, and drove away. You can call me a coward, but it's better to be a coward and stay alive. The next day, I came back with the sheriff, and he inspected the house. Apparently, someone had moved into my house after my grandfather's death. I told the sheriff about the suspicious man who had come to see me. The sheriff questioned him. The man insisted that something terrible had happened in the house, and that no one should live there. The sheriff didn't believe him, and promised to come back again. Unfortunately, I never spent another night in that house. After that incident, all the noises stopped, and the police couldn't find the person who had been living in my attic. Was it the same person who used the axe? Was it the same person who turned on the lights and opened the door? What would he have done if I hadn't left? I'll never know the answer to that question, but I have a feeling that my grandfather was hiding something from me. Hi, my name is Ron, and this story happened when I was 23 years old, 4 years ago. It's hard for me to remember that day because it changed my everyday life forever. I was working in an office and had to finish a weekly report. It had a lot of charts and calculations, but that's not important. The main thing is, I was exhausted. I finished around 11 p.m. and only one other person was left in the office, Christina. She was also finishing a report, but she worked in a different department. When I was done, I walked over to Christina and asked if she was going to be much longer. She said she'd stay for another hour. I didn't wait and decided to take a taxi home. I left the building and ordered a ride to my address. My home was in the suburbs, in a not-so-great area. I waited around 20 minutes before the taxi arrived. I got into the car and greeted the driver, but he didn't respond. I was sitting in the back seat of an old Volkswagen and couldn't see the driver's face. But I have other senses, and one of them started screaming. The car reeked of cheap cigarettes and mold. It felt like I had stepped into a restroom at a roadside diner. But no, I was in an old car, just trying to get home quickly. I forgot to mention something important. I was wearing an expensive suit because our company had a strict dress code. You'll understand why I'm emphasizing that later. During the ride, the driver remained silent and smoked a lot. I started coughing but didn't ask him to open the window. I didn't even want to talk to this man. About 15 minutes later, we pulled up to my house, and I got out of the car. I paid for the ride and started walking to my front door. The car stays parked where it was, but I figured he was probably waiting for another client. I reached the porch and unlocked the door. I looked back one more time and noticed something unsettling. The driver was staring right at me. His gaze was disturbing, and I quickly went inside. Finally, I was home. It had been a hard day. Time to take a shower. That's what I was thinking as I entered my house. I went to the kitchen and heated up some leftover pizza from the day before. I grabbed a slice and headed to the shower. My shower stall wasn't very big. I turned on the hot water to relax before bed. Some people listen to music or the radio, but I shower in silence. I'm used to it. I heard something fall in the kitchen. I didn't think much of it and kept showering. 10 minutes later, I came out and headed to the living room, just thinking about lying on the couch, watching YouTube, and relaxing. I forgot all about the sound in the kitchen. 2 hours passed, and I dozed off. I woke up in a state of deep anxiety. I heard the sound of a door opening coming from the kitchen. Even though I had just woken up, I clearly understood I was no longer alone in the house. I slowly sat up, trying not to make a sound. The room was dark, and I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight, but turning it on would have been a dumb move. Instead, I quietly walked into the bedroom and opened a window. I figured if I saw the intruder coming, I could escape through it. I called emergency services and stayed still in the room. Soon, I heard more sounds from the kitchen. Someone opened the fridge and broke some plates. I thought maybe a homeless person had broken in just to eat, but then I heard footsteps. He walked into the living room and started smashing my furniture. He was throwing stuff everywhere, clearly looking for something. I didn't know what to do, especially since I didn't know if he had a weapon. I tried to find something for self-defense, but ended up dropping my phone by accident. My heart nearly stopped. The noise in the living room stopped. I heard slow footsteps coming toward my bedroom. Thank God I had locked the door, I thought. The person who had trashed my house was now standing right outside my door. He knew I could hear him. He just stood there, completely silent. I froze and stopped breathing. I didn't know what would happen next. He stood there for about a minute, then slowly walked away. A few minutes later, the police arrived, and I told them everything that happened. They searched the house and assessed the damage. It seemed like the burglar was looking for valuables or money, but he didn't find anything unsurprising, since I don't have anything like that. Apparently, I forgot to lock the door, and he just walked in. But who was he? I couldn't sleep all night. I felt anxious and made myself some coffee. Then I played some Counter-Strike. Thankfully, I had the day off and didn't need to wake up early. In the morning, I went to make breakfast and looked out the window. At that moment, I froze like a statue. Across the street, the same Volkswagen was parked. The taxi I had taken the night before. The same man was sitting in the driver's seat, staring directly at me. He stared for a full minute before starting the engine and driving away. I don't know if he was the one who broke into my home. Maybe he thought I was rich because of the expensive suit. It doesn't matter. I immediately called the police and reported it. I never saw that man again.